taking into account everything that Curse of the Pink Panther went through, it appeared as though they had killed the franchise. Just after the billion-dollar lawsuit between MGM and Edwards was settled on the two ill-fated Panther productions, Blake had the idea to relaunch the series for the third time. Whereas Trail and Curse had failed, he thought this one would succeed. Son of the Pink Panther was written by Edwards, including husband and wife duo Steve and Madeline Sunshine. When looking into casting the descendant of Clouseau, Kevin Kline and Rowan Atkinson were picked, but turned down their offers. Gerard Depardieu, hopefully I said that right, was third in line and had a keen interest, but was no longer available by the time production rolled around. Another factor was when Giancarlo Buriti took control of MGM in 1990, the studio withdrew financing from the project, and Edwards sued until Alan Ladd Jr. came on board, with MGM settling out of court. The part was eventually settled with Italian comedian Roberto Benigni. The newly revived UA agreed to distribute Sun if Edwards could find a third-party backer. Aurelio De Laurentiis provided the backing if Benigni, at the time Italy's #1 box office draw, were given a chance at international stardom. Edwards at this point was over the hill and struggled to shoot another big international film on $24 million, an extra million being spent on the opening title sequence, but soldiered ahead. Production went from June to October 1992 on St. Paul Devent's Pinewood Studios in the country of Jordan. Edwards assembled his director's cut, which ran close to 2 hours, but concurrent with the last Pink Panther, MGM changed managements and took over distribution and ownership of Sun from UA. They cut the film down to its current length of 93 minutes and pushed the release date from Memorial Day to the last week of August, where studios usually bury their dead, with virtually no promotion. Although it earned back $18 million from Italy and was in the top 10 grossing films within the country's year, it still tanked everywhere else, especially domestically, earning back $2.5 million against its $28 million budget after marketing and printing costs. Often perceived by many as one of the worst in the series, it essentially put the final nail in the coffin of the original franchise and Blake Edwards' reputation as movie maker, whom retired 2 years after its release until he passed away in December of 2010. This, in turn, has led to the reboots we all know, but I'm going to personally save Birth of the Pink Panther for another video and how that was converted into the Steve Martin thingamajig, amongst other hidden gems. I know I'd rather cut to the chase and say that the series should have ended at the right point in time, but what if the script was genius? What if there was a potentially salvageable sequel that never saw through because the studio refused to give Edwards another chance? Much the same as Curse, there's not much to find since no one goes into depth surrounding the production history of these movies, lesser-known entries in which case. With respect to Tapa Talk forums and the Blu-ray, I could see in the little glimpses with the included featurette and super rare extended trailer nobody else can get a hold of or dares to post online, a gist of the sequel that could have been. Even so, I still wanted to refer to the original source. I was scouring online to find the screenplay for Sun until I was referred to Scriptfly, where I bought it for $25. This is probably hands down the holy grail of Pink Panther lost media I wanted to get my hands on, amongst others, ever since referring to these films as a chronically online youngin'. Maybe not full-on iPad Gen Alpha, but you get the point. We already know what happened when they tried to replace Clouseau, but what if this new detective shared his DNA? Like 23andMe, SNL reference by the way, Inspector Clouseau's biggest mistake lives on as we go along with Son of the Pink Panther's script to screen. The script opens the same, with Arnon secretly taping Princess Yasmin on their yacht, the titular Pink Panther, not the Diamond, in Monaco, and the gang members Hanath, Garth, Yasha, and Kuranik, the leader, watching it back, minus the fight training and with King Harak and another handmaiden on board. Yasmin has a sort of disagreement with the maiden, culminating in tearing off her sari and running off. The scenes between King and Princess driving in a limousine and the casino are the same. Yasmin slapping Kuranik mistakenly as a bodyguard. Late at night, the gang members are back at the villa. An intoxicated Arnon enters, references to getting the harbor master drunk enough to tell him that Yasmin is heading off for Korsaka early the next day. Hanath throws him into the pool to sober him up. They all gather scuba gear and weapons, then head for the van. The yacht sets off in the daytime. The captain jokes on the fact that last time he started up the boat early, he unintentionally woke up Yasmin and was chased around with a knife. A callback and payoff later. Kuranik and the gang abandon their fishing ship, incinerating it, and raid the yacht, mowing down the crewmen, kidnap Yasmin in a helicopter, and asks to have the king abdicated as verbatim to the finished film. Opening titles, which have been shifted ahead in the release film. We then lay on an elaborate sequence, a Clouseau Day celebration, script. We see parades of people, marching bands, which becomes our music. Floats of Clouseau put together as Clouseau, trench mustaches, hats, etc., and coats, a police brigade in full uniform, bringing up the rear, unquote. A memorial statue of Clouseau is in place. Cato and August Balls are being interviewed in the studio about their time spent with Clouseau. Balls recalls his first encounter with him, spotting his wife in the storefront window, having fainted amidst, quote, a field of artificial gouters and false noses, unquote, with intention of buying her nose. Then displays a photo book with his favorite disguise, the Quasimodo. Proved so popular there was even a dance craze called the Quasimodo hump. Dreyfus arrives on the scene with Francois, unnerved by all the Clouseau lookalikes pounding on the car. He gets out while Francois has to park 3 blocks down and gets thrashed into the crowds amidst a conga dance. The anchorman goes on about how Clouseau was killed in the line of duty, being blown up in a farmhouse while investigating Marcel Langlois, quote, a pig farmer and self-styled combustion scientist, unquote, suspected of trying to blackmail France's automotive industry, harvesting pig manure in an illicit processing plant and converting it into methane gas, specifically having applied a patent on a methane vehicle called the Mairdmobile. A vocal transcription of Clouseau is provided of his last call to headquarters about investigating the barn, leading to a miscommunication about if his hench is correct. He sets foot in the barn, and the rest writes itself when he lights a match. The only remains being his inscribed matchbook. Dreyfus escapes the conga and spots a woman in black placing flowers onto Clouseau's statue, whom he tries to question, but she resists and gets pushed off. The TV crew captures the scene, pointing to the fact that she usually evades before being questioned. They attempt to get an inquiry from Dreyfus, but he backs off. Francois reappears, and the two are hauled via helicopter into an emergency meeting with the president concerning the recent kidnapping and ransom. He puts Dreyfus in charge of the investigation and tells him to solve it before he starts negotiations with Lugash, as it will impact power in the Middle East. Now, for some reason in the script, Lugash is mentioned as Morocco, but you get the point. The kidnappers arrive and load Yasmin into the van, which leads into the sequence between Karanik's gang, Dreyfus, and Jacques Gambrelli. We get an earlier introduction between Chief Lazare and Jean-Claude as they discuss about Dreyfus' arrival, having provided him and his assistant with the red rental car. There's a crosscut between Lazare and Dreyfus as they talk about one another behind their backs. Karanik's gang, Dreyfus, and Jacques Gambrelli crash and encounter each other scene for scene, but with an extension after Francois and Dreyfus leave, where they're trying to rationalize the parallels between the former Clouseau and this Gambrelli cop, namely a Twilight Zone reference, gag, and theme music. The gang members drive through fog and talk about today, how they should have taken a different route, and kill Jacques before he could identify the princess. We go to the office with Lazare, Claude, and Dreyfus in attendance, just extended between Lazare and Claude after the latter heads out, mostly on assigning Gambrelli as the best man for Lien's son. There's additional media coverage from the king about his abdication. The hospital sequence, car, and bike chase, and Gambrelli plummeting off a pier with Dreyfus jumping in after him are unchanged. They then head back to Maria Gambrelli's house, where Dreyfus and her discuss about the encounter at the parade before being given a revelation. Jacques is Clouseau's illegitimate son. Dreyfus gets blown up when the gang members plant an explosive in the house as Francois sleeps in the car. Played differently in the final film, but similar beats. What's more is a deleted scene from an Italian print, which has Jacques playing with a condom on the drive back, having sneezed and trying to wipe it off the windshield. Chief Lazare does a Red Riding Hood roleplay with his wife, full-on costume, when he gets a call from Jean-Claude about what happened. This is alluded earlier in the office. We get an extension between Anand and Karanik related to the house explosion before a fight ensues when Yasmin tries to escape, grazing Karanik's arm with a broken wine bottle. Dreyfus' scene in the hospital room is no different than the final film, minus the electronic bed and remote gags that were added in after, and some differences. Jacques ends up kicking a bedpan, splashing Chief Lazare and Jean-Claude standing by, and more exchanges between Jacques, Lazare, and Dreyfus, specifically on the princess, and offering round-the-clock custody for Jacques and Marie. Marie thanks him with a kiss on the cheek. Jacques goes to do the same, but Dreyfus recoils. The leg traction pulley gag, similar to Curse, is reused here. The gang members come to the hospital and inadvertently take Jacques, disguised as a doctor, as seen. The scene back in Lugash between King Harak, Queen, and General Jafar is unaltered. The link between this is that the latter are responsible for Yasmin's abduction. Jacques and Yusa arrive at the villa. Jacques asks about who did the house's architecture and is told to put his hands up. There's miscommunication with Jacques thinking that's his name. Yusa questions if he's even a real doctor and how they've met before. Quote, "Well, who knows? Maybe I took you out." "No. Then maybe I took your appendix out." Unquote. The scene between Karanik and Jacques plays out as in the film, except in the script he just faints after seeing the wound, hence the Carol Burnett gag being added in. Jacques is then thrown into the back room with Yasmin. We see General Jafar sleeping with his bed partner, Rima, when he gets phoned by the Queen. Karanik and his company come in, drugging Yasmin and Jacques before placing them in separate transportation. Yasmin on a helicopter, Jacques in a car bomb. Scene plays out the same with Jacques stumbling out just before the van explodes, except it ends with Jacques rolling down the hill and on his stomach muttering himself to sleep. Speaking of which, there is another link to Clouseau, even though there's no mention of it in the script I had, but we'll sum it up here based on what I read. Clouseau's ghost originally turns up. Jacques sees the specter of his father tripping over a rock before revealing his parentage. Jacques is so stunned he passes out just as Clouseau ponders how a ghost could trip on a rock. It's only later in the hospital when Jacques tells Maria about his dream, it prompts her to tell him the truth. Likewise, going off the end credits, there is an actor in credit listed, but no such scene comes up in the final film, unlike what I just told you here. But I digress. There's another humorous costume roleplay between Chief Lazare and his wife, this time as Little Miss Muffet, when he gets another ill-timed phone call about Jacques. Jacques wakes up in the hospital, and everything else that comes is the same. Lazare being knocked out of the window clinging to the phone, Dreyfus flatlining, Maria telling Jacques the truth about his bloodline, and Lazare and Dreyfus being in the intensive care unit. Jacques goes to August and Madame Balls for disguises with some extensions here and there. Jacques tries on one disguise. Cato and his elderly mother are having dessert in a Chinese restaurant. Cato reaches for a leftover lychee, but gets knocked off the chair by his mother. He gets a phone call by Balls to let him know about where Jacques is. At night over Marseille, Karanik and the group's helicopter secretly approaches the airport with its navigation lights off. Air traffic control detects an unidentified radar blimp descending dangerously close to an incoming Air France 707, causing alarm because the helicopter is invisible to the naked eye. At the last minute, the helicopter switches on its landing lights and touches down beside a waiting Otter aircraft on the runway. The kidnappers quickly transfer Yasmin. Despite tower orders to shut down and not take off, the Otter ignores commands, accelerates down the runway, and lifts off. Realizing a kidnapping and illegal departure are in progress, the tower controller orders the police to be called as the plane escapes into the night. Jacques meeting Kato and going out to eat is the same, just longer and with no reference to the Clouseau statue meetup. There's a call out to Cato being Jewish, having converted when he married a woman named Rebecca, which comes around later in the film when he disguises himself as a rabbi. There's a call back to the pig farm explosion. Clouseau did not approve the marriage, leading to the belief that Becky put a voodoo spell on him when he was killed. The two later got divorced, and she fell in love with a Rastafarian bongo player. There's an elongation in the hospital with Dreyfus and his cardiologist. Uncle Idris, as alluded before, is revealed to be a terrorist living near Tangier. Meanwhile, the queen is given a fax by the king about the ransom arrangements and that she'll become the successor once he abdicates his throne tomorrow. When asked why, he refers her to the kidnappers. Francois and Dreyfus watch the news, but with an extension when the news references August Balls. Dreyfus exclaims when he's reminded about his heart. He's handed the newspaper too. Jacques and Cato arrive in the country and go to customs. Some miscommunication about entering the country, referred to as Morocco in the script is mentioned, not Lugash. The scene between The king, queen, and General Jafar is unaltered, as is Quranic and company skydiving with Jasmine to their secret base. Cato and Jacques are told that their hotel room is booked and they don't need to register. Verbatim except the scenes in the taxi, and Cato informs him about his picture in the paper, thus making him a target. Some tomfoolery between the two. Jacques reaches down for some dropped notes on the floor, while Cato ogles a passing maid and trips over Jacques when walking into the room. Miscommunication about stepping on his notes, and with Wasim on the phone. Quranic and company arriving at Uncle Idris' place is unaltered, as well as Cato and Jacques putting on their disguises when Dreyfus calls in, just elongated dialogue, and with them getting transported to Armar's oasis, leading to an action scene, and being led to where the hideout is. Uncle Idris and Quranic's group have dinner. Jasmine tries to escape from the balcony, but gets chased back inside by the guard dogs, and ends up joining the group asking for starters. An earlier jest made by Idris gets paid off here, quote, right now she's thinking about escape. When she realizes it's impossible, she'll start thinking about food, unquote. The Colonel, Cato, and Amar arrive at the desert staging area with the Lugash military where they plan to raid Uncle Idris' palace. Jacques asks a passerby on a camel which way is north, then goes out to Buck's trunk looking for a compass, opening the trunk to reveal a veritable arsenal. Script. Machine guns, handguns, grenades, a rocket launcher, rockets, even a commando uniform, and binoculars. Yes. On the handle of the Rambo knife is a compass. Jacques slams the lid. A dog begins barking, ambles out into the street, eyeing Jacques suspiciously. Jacques jumps in the Buick and drives away, unquote. Jacques, dressed in a size too small commando suit, spies on the group's compound. There's another exchange between Karnik and Idris about Yasmin's unhappiness. If I didn't know better, I'd swear you were getting soft in your old age. When you have done the inhumane things I have done, you're entitled to indulge in an occasional human virtue. Jacques breaks the windshield to fit a rocket launcher over it and drives head-on toward the gate with those at the command shooting at the Buick. The car hits a bump, sending the rocket off course and hitting the other side of the compound. Vastly different than what comes up in the final film. Aside from Jacques smashing the car and it exploding, in the script it emerges from the grenade necklace he was wearing, as well as the final military raid sequence. Most of the kidnappers are mowed down in the carnage. The fight between Yasmin, and Jacques is different. Jacques doesn't get a lift on a helicopter in its rope. Idris is shot dead as in the film. Quranic is shot down by the colonel rather than knocked out by Cato in the film, and Yasmin cradles Jacques as she compliments him. The news report is expounded with General Jafar being exposed behind the kidnapping, the Queen's affair, and plot to become king, and is incarcerated. Dreyfus and Maria come in to check up on Jacques and announce that they're getting married, leading to the ceremony, and Dreyfus given the revelation that Jacques also has a twin sister. There's a third costume roleplay between Chief Lazar and his wife as Papa Bear and Goldilocks when he gets another unwanted call from Jean-Claude about Jacques. He tells him to send flowers and transfer himself to parking duty on Martiqui before ripping the phone out of the wall with such force he falls out the window. Jacques is decorated and honored with a Medal of Bravery by the king and princess, who gives him 2 cheek kisses before giving him 1 big tonguer. He trips over his sword, does a somersault down the stairs before leaping to his feet and declaring in typical Clouseau fashion, "That felt good." This is another favorite of mine, yet is a prime example of how a script can be filmed but ultimately changed in the edit. Whereas naysayers will say that the film will still suck Donkey D, it is fleshed out much better in terms of story, humor, and characters. It essentially reframes the myth of Clouseau while passing the torch off to his illegitimate successor. The Clouseau Day celebration would have expanded the scope and budget of the film, even though the entire thing was cut out, as it not only establishes Dreyfus' arc and him being assigned to the investigation, but also hints of Maria Gambrelli later on. Yes, it essentially would have retconned the events of Trail and Curse by having Clouseau being blown up, but personally if they were to leave that detail out, it'd get the point across, especially having established with what came before it. But to be fair, since the Pink Panther series doesn't follow established continuity, if you also consider Dreyfus being evaporated in Strikes Again but then turns up alive in Revenge, something simple like how the novelization put the Doomsday laser machine, the effects would wear off eventually, it wouldn't be much of a concern. I also like how there's more political intrigue, whereas the film's version doesn't make much sense, as most of that was eliminated. For sure, the script could have used some tightening, and there's some things in question like Chief Lazar getting constant phone calls during his costume role-playing, but it's a way to keep things fresh and funny. The final product does seem like a missed opportunity, and most would question the tone of it as it's darker than the other entries, while the script has a fine line between the two, especially considering most of the lines and whatever improv that Benini and company, Lazar, and Claude never get to deliver script-wise. Jacques is portrayed in the script as an all-action hero with Clouseau-esque moments, but in the final film he's just a one-dimensional klutz with everyone else around him doing the real work. His victory is handed to him on a silver platter rather than actually achieved. And whose undoing was that? The studio execs. It's not known if there's even Pink Panther work prints around because I'd be curious if these would be included amongst other cut footage that the studio may have. Or not. The Italian print and trailers prove otherwise with the aforementioned condom scene amongst others. I get how these movies don't have any sort of Zack Snyder campaign nor given that treatment, but these Pink Panthers are interesting observations at that. As always, it's better to live in a series of oh wells than what ifs.